Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hey, that's me. Thank you for listening. Whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com as well. It is Tuesday morning. It is cold. Yeah, I awoke to 31 degrees. I don't know about where you are. If you are nearby, then you're kind of chilly with me. That explains why the cats were burrowed up into armpits when I woke up this morning. I ain't mad. Second half of today's show, my guest is going to be a former radio co-host of mine. Her name is Mackenzie Crabtree. Those of you who may have known me from my radio iteration in Augusta, Georgia, you may remember her as Mackenzie Clark on Y105. The pop station back in Augusta, Georgia that she and I both worked on. We're both real estate agents, and we're both wondering what's going to happen with our industry with the National Association of Realtors deciding to pitch a settlement that would, if allowed, take effect July 24th later this year. There's a lot of questions. And so we just had a nice, casual, hopefully somewhat informative conversation discussing those issues facing the real estate industry and the greater economy on the whole yesterday afternoon. I'll have that for you second half of today's show. However, the first thing I want to talk about is, actually the first half of the show could be very much an international version of the show. I want to first touch on the fact that Laken Riley's father, Jason Riley, has finally talked to the media. He was on NBC News and the Today Show yesterday.
Laken, to you.
She was like an angel.
This morning, Jason Riley speaking out for the first time, describing his 22-year-old daughter, Laken, as an avid marathon runner with dreams of one day becoming a nurse and working with children.
We were looking forward to seeing her graduate next year. She was so full of life. I just hate that, she was taken so early.
Police say Laken was murdered while jogging on the University of Georgia campus last month.
I wake up every day thinking, that I can call her, and I can't.
Police have charged 26-year-old Jose Antonio Ibarra with her murder. Ibarra, a Venezuelan citizen, entered the U.S. illegally in 2022, officials say. And despite an arrest in New York and a citation for shoplifting in Georgia, was never deported. Do you think a difference in immigration policy would have made a difference for Laken?
We have no idea if that would have changed anything, but he's here illegally, that he might not have been here had we had secure borders.
I want you to pay attention to the fact that here is a grieving father, Jason Riley, who doesn't, to me, at all sound like a liberal or even a moderate-leaning Democratic kind of voter. And yet he's not really seeking to politicize his daughter's death. He is a grieving father, mourning her loss and talking about immigration or immigration policy from a sane perspective. I, for one, can appreciate that. Let's let the interview continue.
Laken's murder has become a flashpoint in the partisan debate over immigration. Former President Trump meeting with Laken's mom and stepdad earlier this month, just days after this tense exchange at the State of the Union. Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene imploring President Biden to say Laken Riley's name.
Laken Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal.
I feel like she's being used somewhat politically.
How do you feel about that?
It makes me angry. She was much better than that. She should be raised up for the person that she is.
An angel on earth, her heartbroken father says, now gone far too soon.
That's NBC News' Priscilla Thompson, featured on the Today Show yesterday, reporting from Athens, Georgia. Actually, with some more news, we've got a little bit more background, some movement on how the murder case, is taking shape.
Truly heartbreaking. And while the suspect has not yet entered a plea, we are now learning that he is demanding a jury trial according to court documents. And the family of Laken Riley is also preparing for what is likely to be a difficult trial. Her father telling me that he is heartbroken not only for his family, but also the family of the suspect whose lives have been forever changed. And he told us that if he were to see the suspect's mother, he would want to give her a hug because he believes that's what his daughter would have done.
My opinion, we need more adults having conversations of substance when it comes to social norms and policy, even. More adults like Jason Riley, who literally just lost his daughter weeks ago and isn't beating a xenophobic drum, but just speaking from, again, a position of being a father in mourning, but also a level of sense and sensibility that I shouldn't be surprised by. That should be the norm. However, in today's blue v red, liberal v conservative environment, we just don't see it that much anymore. By the way, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Michelle Baruchman posts a story, the headline, Georgia sheriffs worry about new burdens from immigration bills. Sheriffs are raising concerns about legislation in the Georgia General Assembly targeting illegal immigration, saying the bills would shift more of the burden to them to identify people in the country without legal permission and hold them for federal authorities. Authors of the bill say some sheriffs in the state are not cooperating with federal immigration officials. Baruchman continues, under some of these proposed requirements, sheriffs would have to attempt to verify a suspect's immigration status and honor requests for detainment so that federal officials can deport them. Failure to comply could result in a sheriff being charged with a misdemeanor and loss of state and state-administered federal funding. The article continues, legislation regarding sheriff's roles in enforcing immigration has been in the works for at least a year, but efforts gained steam last month after police charged Jose Antonio Ibarra for the death of nursing student Laken Riley near the University of Georgia's campus. Ibarra lives in Athens, but is not a U.S. citizen, and authorities say he entered the country illegally in 2022. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, according to Baruchman, contacted more than a dozen sheriffs across Georgia about the legislation. Many, especially in metro Atlanta counties, would not comment on the bills. But most sheriffs who spoke to the AJC said they already comply with federal requests to seek citizenship information about suspects and honor requests from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to hold them. Terry Norris, the executive director of the Georgia Sheriff's Association, said 120 sheriffs across the state who responded to a survey said they were already notifying ICE. However, sheriffs said some of what lawmakers want is hard to accomplish. Sheriffs can enforce immigration law without federal authorization, which few have, and information on the immigration status of suspects may be limited, and sometimes jailers make mistakes. Everybody lets things slip through the cracks sometimes. That's Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills. House Bill 1105, Michelle Baruchman writes, sponsored by Savannah Republican Jesse Petrie, would prohibit cities and counties from enacting immigration sanctuary policies that would allow local officials to give safe harbor to people living in the country without legal permission. Georgia law already restricts local governments from acting as immigration sanctuaries, but supporters of HB 1105 say the bill gives that law additional enforcement muscle. Baruchman's article continues. Sheriffs would also be required to apply for the 287G program, which, approved by Congress in 1996, gives local authorities the power to investigate, detain, and transport people facing deportation. The House last month approved HB 1105, and it is awaiting a vote by the Senate. I'm hearing a lot of dollar signs being necessary here. Are we throwing money at this as well? Because we can't. We just had a bipartisan bill that was snuffed out in Congress that provided additional funding to our immigration system at the federal level, which would help with some of this problem as well. And then at the state level, we're in this race to pass 1105 and another, the House Bill 301, which Baruchman writes would allow residents to sue local governments they believe are not following the immigration laws. That's an expenditure, not additional funding to help local law enforcement do what these bills ask of them or insist of them to do. The article goes back to Sheriff Sills from Putnam County, who says he's concerned about additional requirements these bills are going to add. 1105, by the way, jailers would be required to compile and post on their website a report that includes the number of inmates booked, inquiries made about suspects to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, responses received for requests, and the number of immigration detainees issued by ICE. We're constantly having laws passed that put onerous ancillary duties on us because of other counties that won't comply with the law, Sill said. Every minute we are tasked with a bureaucratic reporting process is only going to take away from our ability to protect the public on the streets. Baruchman continues, language in the bill would also require sheriffs to enforce federal immigration laws. But unless sheriffs are part of the 287G program, Georgia Sheriff's Association Terry Norris said, they cannot operate as a federal agent. And Sill said it is often impossible to determine suspects' immigration status if they give false names or dates of birth and are jailed for their first offense. That's because sheriffs can only work with the information they have. When someone commits a crime and gets sent to jail, the arresting officer scans their fingerprint and sends it to the Georgia Crime Information Center. The officer also runs an inquiry with the suspect's name and date of birth through a system called the Law Enforcement Support Center, which connects to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to provide information about that person's immigration status. But information will only come back if that person has been previously apprehended by ICE. It will also notify the officer if that person holds a green card or has sought asylum, according to Lindsey Williams, spokesperson for the Atlanta ICE office. There's no way for a jail officer at 2 a.m. to determine whether or not a person is here illegally from the nationality of the person unless that person admits to it or they have had prior contact with ICE or some prior arrest, according to Sheriff Sills. Michelle Baruchman's excellent reporting continues here. Even if ICE does request a detainer for a suspect, sheriffs cannot hold suspects for more than 48 hours without violating their Fourth Amendment rights, protecting them from unreasonable searches and seizures. If ICE has not come within that time period, sheriffs must release them. Again, this goes back to the funding needed at the federal level that we had an opportunity to pass with bipartisan support earlier this year. If ICE sends a detainer, we honor that detainer. That's Forsyth County Sheriff Ron Freeman. ICE doesn't honor its own detainer because they don't come pick them up, he says. Lindsey Williams, a spokesperson again with the Atlanta ICE office, follows that ICE has limited resources and has to prioritize cases with the highest risk to public safety. Again, the funding mechanism. Is it now easier to understand why we have some concern with local law enforcement being tasked with handling something that is a federal issue if the federal issue isn't federally funded to be handled better by federal authorities? And yet you've got preening, posturing politicians at the state level only making local law enforcement's jobs even tougher. Michelle Baruchman's piece, which we'll feature in the show notes at ronshowatl.com, hears from some other sheriffs throughout the state. We'll hear from them when the Ron Show returns. Incidentally, if you miss any of this show, you tune in midway through on America One Radio. You can always catch it in its entirety on demand at progressivevoices.com. We also podcast the show later in the afternoon. Just follow The Ron Show on your preferred podcast platform. As I continue reading from Michelle Baruchman's article, which gives voice to some frustration that local sheriffs have with hastily passed legislation to deal with immigration, but at the county law enforcement level, it just reminds me that we have far too often chambers full of lawyers and activists who are not skilled in the industries that they are targeting with legislation. I mean, how many times have we seen hastily passed bills that deal with? Well, last year it was all about transgender, gender affirming care. Not enough doctors in the chamber. I can think of Dr. Au. Not enough doctors in the chamber, but Dr. Michelle Au, who, the voice of reason, obviously outvoted. And here you have a chamber full of lawyers who are hastily drafting laws to deal with immigration issues, but putting the onus on local law enforcement when, again, at the federal level, we don't have the funding in place for ICE to do what these laws at the state and federal level want ICE to do. I'm sitting here thinking about that part where we mentioned in the last segment where a suspect is fingerprinted. And, well, I mean, a fingerprint does you no good if there's no prior fingerprinting. And wouldn't it be something, I don't know, if we had a cohesive and well-funded procedure in place that instead of choking people off into a handful of entry spots, legal ports of entry, that we had more than enough, or at least marginally enough ports of entry so that folks didn't feel compelled to try and cross illegally, but instead knew that we had a process in place that would give them a chance. They'd still be given a chance at an asylum hearing in a timely manner. And maybe at the port of entry that they would be coming to legally, we were able to fingerprint them better. And then we'd have them in the system. Listen, I'm not naive enough to think that we're not going to have people who are going to try and slip across the border illegally and thus skip that process. But in the case of Jose Antonio Ibarra, who's been here since 2022, he didn't come here just to break laws. He actually had jobs. I mean, it seems by all accounts he came here to try and work. And oh, by the way, there's a piece that also came out in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution today that spoke to labor violations throughout the Southeast and in Georgia, which run rampant in the agricultural industry, according to the Department of Labor. Lataro Greenspan spoke to this in Lataro's article. Federal investigators announced today they are finding labor abuses in the overwhelming majority of agricultural work sites inspected in the Southeast. The Department of Labor investigating 240 suspected violations of labor laws by agricultural employers in 8 states, including Georgia. They found violations in 90% of those investigations. Lataro continues, employers in the Southeast region where investigations were conducted are increasingly relying on the H-2A Agricultural Guest Worker Program, which is administered by the Department of Labor in cooperation with state authorities. The program allows migrant farm workers to stay in the U.S. for a limited time to help with crop harvests. In Georgia, a temporary guest worker from Latin America account for a critical wedge of the agricultural workforce. Last fiscal year, a high of 37,535 workers crossed the border to legally come work in the state. By the way, there's gobs of empirical evidence that shows that we need more immigrants to come here to work in this country because we're going to have far more jobs than we have people to hold those jobs, thanks to the aging baby boomer and my Gen X generation. So we need a better system in place. We need to fund that system better so that we can make use of those who seek to come here for legal means. But Ibarra, again, didn't seem to come here to chase women and potentially kill them. So it just seems to me like we're passing laws that aren't really going to save lives and certainly aren't helping local law enforcement. Forsyth County Sheriff Ron Freeman, you do a disservice to citizens when you don't honor the ICE detainer because you have no idea what they want him for, he said. But then let's go back 48 hours, otherwise the Fourth Amendment. Baldwin County Sheriff Bill Massey in Michelle Baruchman's article in the AJC. We try to be proactive and stay in compliance, especially for something as serious as immigration. Cobb County Sheriff Craig Owen said he has complied with federal and state laws related to detainment, but he said he does not want to, quote, run the risk of detaining lawful American citizens. Cobb County Sheriff Owens really sort of owns the moment here. This is really catching on to what it is that I'm trying to point out here. Sheriff Owens criticized lawmakers' work on the new immigration bills, which he said were drafted without the input of sheriffs. Backing the blue means including us, he said. Also towards the end, and I believe warrants a separate article in and of itself, but hey, Michelle Baruchman did a great job on this piece. Advocates for immigrant communities said these bills unfairly targeted Latinos. Yeah, can you say racial profiling? I can see it happening here, and that's exactly what Giovanni Serrano said. Serrano is a community organizer for the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights and said he's concerned these bills would lead to, quote, racial profiling and civil rights violations and the erosion of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. We already talked about how law enforcement needing to have a relationship with the immigrant community and why a sanctuary mindset or permissiveness prevails because it aids law enforcement in more serious crimes. All right, much more to watch on that story as it continues. So anyway, as I mentioned a good bit yesterday, the real estate industry in the United States is in this, which way do we go? What do we do? And we're already seeing a slowdown in transactions, and that's not good for the economy. And so, you know what? An old say old, a former radio co-host of mine, Mackenzie Crabtree, joins me. She is a real estate agent, has been for about 20 years. She and I will discuss what do we make of all this as realtors. That's next on The Ron Show, the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast.
Want to be on the show? Have a cause or campaign you'd like to speak up for? Email Ron at ronshowatl.com or call 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So yesterday, I had a nice long segment on the show talking a good bit about how I think the media is just mishandling the National Association of Realtors story, their settlement structure. We had a long conference call, I guess you would call it that, or a Zoom session, or it was on YouTube with the CEO for the company I work for, eXp Realty. And there's still more questions than answers. We still don't have documents that we need. We still don't have ready to go listing presentations or buyer brokerage agreements, blah, 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 blah. We just don't know. But the media seems to know that the 6% commission structure is going away. And listen, I've said it as long as I've been in real estate, as goes the real estate market, so goes the economy, which in a political year is no small thing. So the National Association of Realtors drops this bombshell on us Friday, and we have this looming thing coming in July that, again, none of us really knows specifically what the fallout's going to be. But I thought it would be really cool if I brought an old radio co-host of mine on, and by the way, she's not old. I'm saying a former radio co-host.
Come on, Ron.
Yeah, a former radio co-host of mine who got into real estate like almost from the minute she was transitioning out of radio back in the 1990s. Mackenzie Clark, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. How are you?
Oh, how funny. It wasn't 1990s, actually.
You were getting into real estate, were you not?
I did buy a house, if that counts. But no, I didn't really actually start my radio career, my real estate career, until 2005. So I had moved to Charleston, South Carolina in order to do radio. And
that's right.
The station got clear channeled, and so that was the end of that.
Yeah. It's so funny. We were talking as former radio people how the radio industry has actually kind of gone through a lot of what we may be experiencing in the real estate business back in the 90s and early 2000s, this perpetual change that has been a slow drift to, in radio anyway, to meh. I don't expect that to happen in real estate, but have you been surprised as well the way the headlines, the clickbait, the social media has been about this NAR settlement since last Friday?
I think that they're all trying to get ahead of it and just vie to be the first person, the first group to kind of talk about it. And what's happening is they're spreading a lot of misinformation because half the stuff we don't even have yet. Mm-hmm. We don't have documents. We don't have the buyer's brokerage agreements spelled out for this situation and exactly what that's going to entail. I'm really interested to see, I have a separate boutique brokerage. And for my agents, I'm going to write something up just as a basic hold harmless just for us. And again, we do have a minute to do this. It's not starting until July.
Yeah.
My basic overall feeling is that we will make it through it, as everybody usually does in whatever group they're working with or whatever field they're in. I mean, if you look at like the insurance companies, they're going through hell right now. The financial securities, oh my gosh, they can't even text. Mm-hmm. They have to have everything by the book, and then they have all these people coming in just to make sure that they're doing it correctly. So I think every industry is going to go through some sort of a revolution, and then you add AI in there, and nobody has a job. So yeah, I think you just have to find a different either niche with the situation, or you're going to have to just be the best buyer's broker you can be, have complete value. If you're moving to a different niche, maybe you start specializing in short sales. Maybe you are only helping veterans. Maybe you're only helping first-time buyers, and you're working out some deals with them. Maybe you're going into commercial. Who knows? So there's other areas within the real estate realm, and just as the market changes, you have to just adapt or you die.
So you know this because you've been at this for nearly 20 years. Everybody always wants to know, well, what's the market like? Because everyone is either somehow invested, like they have a home and they want to know what could be potentially for them, or they want to get into it as a first-time home buyer and need to know or are curious anyway how tough it is to get in. I right now when people ask me, I'm like, couldn't tell you. I know interest rates are crazy, and that has folks sort of on pause, selling and buying, because sellers have those rates from 2 or 3 years ago that were in the 2s and 3s, and they don't want to lose those. They don't want to jump into the 6s and 7s. And so since they're not going to sell, the buyers have less to look at, and they don't want to get at this rate either. So they're looking for ways around it, And so nobody wants to say the R word, but we're in a little bit of a housing recession throughout the country in various spots. And I also think like these next 4 months, this wait and see what's going to happen, I think that's only going to exacerbate it. Do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, I do. I think that as far as like some of these buyers, I feel like if they can get an assumable loan, if they can assume the sell 3.2% mortgage, they are ready to go. And people are having to move because of job changes or, family situations. So there are still instances, people are still buying and selling. And we're about to get into spring. So this is going to be really weird. But as you know, we're at a strange time in history here anyway, because we have the highest prices, we have no inventory, and we also have the highest rates. So that combination is so crazy. So even if you have cash and you're going in, that seller still has a lot of pressure to find a place to live.
Yeah.
Well, leveraged, but a lot of pressure to find someplace else.
Yeah.
I think about that all the time. It's like, oh, my house has gone up, X amount.
Yeah, but where are you going to go?
Where go exactly. So, but I think also if people are just waiting for that magic time when rates are back to 2 and when they can get the best deal and everything falls, that's not a good strategy for investing either. So I just think that everything is going to kind of shift, and you really just have to take it at a case by case basis. I think technically some of these agents really just need to dig deep and see, is this what I want to do? Do I want to ride this wave, or do I want to go get a more comfortable situation?
Yeah, and listen, I'm in full transparency. I'm one of those people. I've been at this for 4 years, but bear in mind, I got my license like just months before COVID, and the subsequent, shelter in place, and then the craziness after that. When you're a new agent and you're mostly dealing with first time home buyers, and those first time home buyers are priced out of the market, even though the rates are fantastic, they don't have the money to pay above and beyond. So it was a tough sled the first year and a half, for someone brand new at this. And you and I know this from working in radio. Like, you go into this field with the tools that we have from working in broadcasting, the marketing and social media and the verbiage and the being able to communicate. It should
open houses.
Yeah.
Open houses. Total broadcast remotes, right?
Exactly. Minus the Oogie car salesman and the pizza that they're festering over.
I still bring pizza. No, go ahead. Anyway.
Yeah. But so, it should have been a slam dunk. But again, there were challenges. So I find myself thinking the same thing. Do I stick it out, or do I, hedge my bets and just say, you know what, I'm going to keep this going on, but maybe I'm going to do something else as well. But I think that's kind of the way with the broader economy in this country anyway.
When we went through 2007, 2008, and 2009, when the foreclosures were happening and everybody's freaking out and the banks are calling in all their loans, we thought the industry was dead then. And then a lot of good things actually did come out of it. A lot of people got a lot of second chances. A lot of people picked up property super cheap. I mean, things that were positive did come out of it. Personally, I decided at that time, I had already gotten certified as a foreclosure agent, so I felt like I was in the right direction. But at that time also, I looked at commercial. I started taking classes for a designation called CCIM. I started getting into industrial and like homes and land, because I wanted just to have all of those tools, because I do like the real estate industry. I do like the whole art of buying and selling, and first time home buyers are just a joy sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
No, I seriously no. But to me, I wanted to stay in the industry. I just had to kind of rearrange what I wanted to do. So I armed myself with just more knowledge. And I think that as we continue with this, they're not going to completely be able to take the commission for the buyer's agents out of the equation. And I think that's what's really scaring a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, if you think about even just commercial agents, they don't even list their percentage in the MLS. You
Right.
have to call and ask about it.
Mm.
So this decision, not only a money grab for the attorneys and for people who feel like, some people probably were really wronged, but again, a money grab. I think that they're basically stating that you can't put this commission in the MLS. So
Right.
they'll take it out. But maybe we'll have secret signals, because I think that if you are a good listing agent, you're going to talk to your seller and say, well, you want the biggest range of buyers. And that's what we do as listing agents, right? We market the properties. We make sure that we are doing a whole bunch of different things on a whole bunch of different websites, Zillow and Trulia and reverse marketing, stuff like that. And then we're also getting the word out, so these buyers are able to find the property anyway. So it's our responsibility to get that pool, but I don't want to show every single one of my listings. That's not what I do.
Oh, absolutely. No, yeah, it's money well spent when you've got other agents actually showing your property for you. I talked a great deal about that yesterday. So, by the way, let me reset the conversation. I'm on with a former radio co-host of mine. She went by the name Mackenzie Clark on Y105 in Augusta, Georgia. So, professionally, though, that's not what you go by anymore.
Mackenzie Crabtree.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that when folks go to Google you later, since they need to do some real estate work in Charleston, if they do, that they, find the right person. Don't want them to get lost looking for you.
We were talking yesterday. I was talking to my agents and we were laughing because on the counter, I'm going to put 3 cookies on there. So like if you have pictures, your real estate pictures, you're thumbing through, you see the living room, the bedroom, the bathroom on the counter of the kitchen. Okay. There'll be 3 cookies, and that will represent 3% to the buyer's agent. So look for that. There'll be secret signals. There'll be other things, because the well-educated seller will want to have that advantage of still having the buyer's agent. I really do. I mean, some will be
there's value. There's absolutely value in buyer agency. There's no doubt about that. I think the thing that concerned me the most was that if we wind up with this wave, at least initially, of listings where people feel like they don't need to offer commission, they're dismissive to the buyer agent as a concept, or feel like that shouldn't come out of their pocket, that we're going to find ourselves with, what is it? I think the NAR estimates anywhere from 26 to 50% in the last 15 years of buyers are first-time home buyers. So how many of those who aren't going to be able to foot that money themselves to pay an agent are going to be hesitant to even sign a buyer brokerage agreement, let alone be in the game to buy? It's fraught with danger, at least in the initial offering.
Oh, I feel like it's fraught with lawsuits to have your seller actually speaking to a buyer who maybe has never done a transaction before, who chooses not to have buyer representation.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a worse threat to anything. So, I mean, it's my responsibility really as a listing agent to let my seller know we can do things. Again, our entire industry is changing, but like we can do things with commission from 1% to 3%, and it's basically maybe an add-on. So maybe at 1% we'll put it in the MLS, and then we'll do a basic information for you as far as descriptions, but we're not going to do any of our high class marketing, stuff like that. And then as we start to get higher, we'll get you full service. But I do believe they need to add in something for buyer representation. At the end of the day, Ron, I think that there's still going to be that. I just think everybody is going to get screwed as far as commissions. But when's the last time you saw a 6% commission anyway?
I was just going to say that's the dirty little secret. Again, this media narrative that there's this statutory 6% commission throughout the country it's a ruse. Well, I think the average is closer to 5%, and even then, I don't know how many times you've had to get a transaction done where you've had to just cough up 0.5% or something like that just to get something done. But that happens all the time just to get something done.
Right. I mean, do we make a lot of money? Sometimes.
Sometimes.
But do we put in a lot of work? Yes. Well, absolutely.
And we get taxed a lot because we're 1099 too. So there's that, and our own health insurance, et cetera, and so on.
And here's the bigger question that I would just ask you personally. If you weren't doing this, what would you do? What else would you do?
Yeah, no, you're
What
right. It's a valid question. It's one that I've been asking myself a lot here for the last few weeks. No lie.
So at this point, I'm really encouraging my agents
Mm-hmm.
to have conversations with their current sellers, with their current buyers, and practice on them, because this information is coming out, and it really is. When we first had these lawsuits, I thought it was going to be, they're going to come back in and say, oh, well, for the past 15 years, you received a buyer commission. I want it back.
Mm.
And so that was one of the things that I have not heard anything about that yet. I mean, the only thing that has come through that I have seen has just been, we're taking this off the MLS and we're not paying compensation to a buyer's broker.
Mm.
Have you heard anything about that?
No, I mean, no. No, but then
Okay, that scared me worse. But
absolutely. Yeah, come get blood from this turnip. We're with Mackenzie Crabtree. She is a former radio co-host of mine and an excellent real estate agent, a realtor in the Charleston, South Carolina market. Quick break. Come back in a second. We'll wrap this conversation up. You're listening to The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, wherever you podcast. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Thank you for listening. You can follow The Ron Show at Ron Show ATL on Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, or Threads. And I readily admit I need to do more on Threads. My apologies. I'm with Mackenzie Crabtree, former radio co-host of mine back in my radio days in Augusta, Georgia at Y105. She got into real estate back in 2005, and she's super savvy at this. So I figured I'd go to you to have a conversation, an open conversation, agent to agent, about the looming instability in the residential real estate game. When these lawsuits were first made public, what was it, last fall, October, I think, did you have the same reaction that I did, that, come on, there can't possibly be people whose listing agents didn't tell them what the commission structure is all about? I found that to be a bit of a distortion. Like you said in the last segment, that this was a cash grab for attorneys. Some attorney or law firm saw an opportunity to make victims of people who weren't victims. Because I go into a listing presentation, I talk about the commission structure, and when they ask what it's for, I tell them there's going to be a second agent involved, and we call them cooperative agents because they're going to do a lot to get your house sold too.
Right.
So I didn't believe the story of this class action in the first place. I thought it was made up, concocted.
I definitely agree with you. It's interesting because the buyer winds up bringing all of the money anyway.
Yeah.
So the buyer technically, quote, paying commission too, even though it comes out of the seller's proceeds. It's a fine mix there. I feel like last year when we were first talking about this, again, I was more scared that they were going to come back and say, for the past 15 years, we want all of our money back from all the buyer's agents that have ever sold anything. So that to me was that's enough to cripple like a Keller Williams or even EXP.
Oh, yeah.
If you think about all of their transactions, and especially if they're going to be retroactive all the way back. So I have not yet heard anything about that. I do feel like over the course of the next couple of months, even when we start to get into this July, that there are going to be a lot of misconceptions that will have to be set straight on each individual basis for the seller and for the buyer. I definitely believe that. It's just kind of crazy to think that, no buyer's agent is going to actually want to work for free. And it is really hard just to think that the seller's agent will be able to run the whole show. Like, I've done dual agency before, and that's when you are both representing the buyer and the seller.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it is on a bank-owned home, it makes me very nervous because I don't feel like I can give either party my full
Unbiased.
disclosure, unbiased disclosure and just full opinion, and that it's me, and it doesn't necessarily help them. So I am really just curious to see where this is going to wind up at the end.
I tell people in that situation, imagine you're going to fight a traffic ticket and the public defender is there to guide you through the process. But guess who they work for? They work for the same jurisdiction that the judge is going to judge you and fine you. So trust me, they're not in your camp fully. They can't be. It's impossible.
I love that analogy. I love that. I'm going to steal that. That's great.
Please, by all means. Just make sure you cite me because I could use referrals.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. But so again, just to reiterate and to wrap the conversation, my principal concern is what it's going to do to not just the housing market, but the overall economy in the offing right now. Because as you mentioned, we're heading into spring. This is the busy season. Folks like to be in their homes before school starts, early August, and we're not going to have any sort of finality what the business is going to look like until July 24th.
And we don't even have, I think the rates are not even going to be dropped over the next. I just don't think we're going to have another rate cut, to be honest with you, coming up in the next couple of weeks. I think that this will clear out the business. Anybody who was kind of on the fence will get out. Anybody who was already doing Uber Eats and part-time whatever will probably figure out something else. Maybe they'll keep their referral status, but
can it get the agents out who are just listing photos from their mobile devices and not, being super professional about this? Could it? I mean, trust me, Atlanta is eat up with agents and a lot of really bad ones.
Well, you had called me the other day talking about how one of the agents didn't add in the disclosures, and so the Charleston, South Carolina market, if you don't have disclosures, you get fined from the get-go.
Yeah.
So that was always surprising and to have that in Atlanta as well. But, I just think that we just don't know. Just like when COVID hit, a lot of stuff we really just didn't know. 2009, when the first foreclosure wave hit, Bear Stearns falls, you just don't know. And the initial shock is the hardest, and the misinformation and the non-information, and there's no one really to call.
No, and that's the thing. It's like the media has the story right away, but they're just rife with misinformation right now. They don't know because we don't know. We're in the business and we don't know.
You should get on TV. You should go tell them what's going on.
Yeah, I need something to raise my Q profile, no doubt about it. Speaking of, if anybody is looking to buy or sell property in the greater Charleston area, Mackenzie Crabtree, how do they find you?
MackenzieCrabtreeRealEstate.com.
There you go. Thank you so much for joining me. It's good to catch up with you again.
I know. We should do it again sometime. Maybe we'll do a deal before July.
Oh, that would be nice.
Right?
Bring me your buyer. Absolutely awesome to catch up with her. And I guess the overarching sentiment, again, just a little bit from yesterday as well. And I hate to turn this into a real estate podcast because that's not what this is. But everything you're hearing in the media about the real estate industry going into July, nobody knows all the answers. We're just figuring it out as we go along. That's going to do it for The Ron Show. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the American One Radio app, AmericanOneRadio.com. Replay 5 to 6 p.m. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Have a good one.